You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 264. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Do you ever feel like the place you're in right now no longer fits, but you don't yet know what to do about it? If we're talking about your legal practice and we're thinking about it at a big picture, macro level, it might look something like this. You might have your work. It feels more and more like you are just kind of going through the motions, barely keeping up, depending on the speed and intensity of your practice. You might feel like you're on a conveyor belt where you've got this list of tasks and to-dos and you just keep going, right? You wake up, you look at your list, you implement. And when you have a moment to come up for air, you might pause and ask yourself, are you on the right track? But you never really get a chance to answer that question for yourself. And what can happen is you feel increasingly disconnected. It's almost like you're walking through somebody else's life and you just don't feel like you're engaged as much as you used to be. But you're so busy and you're so caught up in the groove and the movement forward that you don't have the time to step back and figure things out. And over time, what can happen is you feel increasingly like you are off track and that perhaps the practice you've built has become unsustainable. So that's what can happen when you feel like things have drifted at a macro level. Now, at a micro level, right, in the day-to-day nitty-gritty of how you go about your work, you might also feel like things just aren't the way that you want them. Your practice might feel really reactive, right? It's like you show up at work and you do not know what your day is going to look like. There are emails flying into your inbox. There are people dropping into your office asking you to do things. You're getting notices and emails and requests from clients and colleagues and all the people, and you're barely keeping up, right? And you feel increasingly behind. The systems that you used to have to keep track of your work and your to-dos just aren't working anymore. Maybe you are one of those people who relied heavily on your working memory, right? You just store it all in your head, and that was working really great. It was your golden egg of productivity, but all of a sudden you're finding that instead of producing gorgeous omelets, you're producing a mess of scrambled eggs, some of which have shells in them. Nobody likes that. Certainly not you, if that's your practice. And so what you might be feeling there is that at a day-to-day level, you just don't have the systems in place, the strategies, the ways of tracking things that are supporting you, right? And so what this means, right? This idea that you're in a place that no longer fits. It could be that you know the role that you're in is not the right role. That's a very big picture macro feeling, or it could be more in the day-to-day, right? It's the way you run your practice. It doesn't have to be practice management. It could be a specific aspect of your work. It's maybe the clients that you work with where some of the relationships just aren't feeling right, right? Maybe you're struggling to establish the type of communication, the type of boundaries, the managing expectations. Maybe it's colleagues at work where you're having those same types of problems. Maybe you're growing disconnected from the type of work that you're doing. So there's all these ways, right, at any given time. And we've been talking about professional situations, but there's also personal situations where it just no longer feels right. And you're not yet at that place where you know what to do about it. And over the weekend, this just past weekend, I was reminded of the awkwardness of the in-between, right? That feeling of stuckness. And the thing that reminded me of that is actually kind of a fun story. And so I'm going to share it with you because I think it paints a pretty good picture of the types of problems we encounter professionally and outside of work too when we outgrow the place that we are in. And I'm also going to offer you some questions to ask yourself to help you get unstuck, to help you rebuild. So with that, the story that I'd love to share is the open house viewings that I went on over the weekend with my husband and my daughter. My son was invited to participate. He was not interested. Can't blame him. So there were 2 houses that we ended up seeing. And the first house was actually the house that we had initially set out to see. Now, as you may know, I am looking, or my family, we are looking at our options in terms of housing because the house that we are in, the place that we live currently, is amazing in so many ways. And yet, as a family of 4, we are increasingly outgrowing our spaces. And so it is on the horizon. It's something we would like to do and probably need to do. And we're not in a huge rush, but we are looking. So this first house that we looked at is a freestanding house in a neighborhood reasonably close to us. And it's one of those houses that has been on the market for some time, right? It's what you might call a fixer-upper, a potential hidden gem. And so that was the first house on our viewing list. It was actually the only house. The second house was a little bit more of a, oh, well, we're here, let's look at it. I'll get to that in a minute. And so we arrive at the location, and it's one of those houses where, you know, the realtor no longer, I suppose it's been on the market that long, the realtor no longer is in the house baking fresh cookies, welcoming a sea of visitors. The realtor was actually sitting in their car, and when they noticed that we were there, they got out of their car and escorted us to the house. That was nice, a little door-to-door service. And so we stepped inside. And to give you a sense of what the house was like, it was relatively large. It had a fair amount of square footage. It had 3 stories. The top 2 stories were, I would say, fairly large. I don't want to give an exact number because I don't know exactly what that is. And there was a bottom level, sort of a quasi basement, not quite underground, but not quite above the ground either. And that had maybe about half the square footage as the other 2 stories. So you can imagine it's got, you know, a relatively large footprint. It had a front yard and a backyard. And as we stepped inside, we saw the first level of the house was what you would expect. There was a living room area to the left of the front door. There was a kitchen behind that and a couple of bedrooms tucked away on the right-hand side, not immediately accessible from the front door. When you went up the staircase, what was interesting was that there was another kitchen upstairs on top of the original kitchen and a couple more rooms, roughly placed above the rooms on the main level I just described. And when you went to the bottom, so if you were able to enter that bottom story, I guess you'd call it, which I think you had to do through the back entrance. I don't think there was a staircase connecting it to the main house, but actually now that I'm thinking about it, there probably was a staircase. I just didn't see it. And there was this sort of a couple of bedrooms down there and a bathroom. You can imagine, you know, we're walking through this house and it took me a few days to decide or to put a finger on what it was that this house lacked or what it said to me. I did not have a feeling of, yes, I must have this house. To me, the experience of looking at a potential place to live is very much a full body experience. I usually have a pretty good sense of, can we live here? And I did not have that. But more than that, there was a feeling that I later was able to identify that the house lacked coherence. It was a big space. It had lots of space, but it lacked coherence. So let me explain what that looked like more specifically in the house. I mentioned there were a couple of kitchens, right? There was one on that main level. It was an older kitchen, and a second kitchen on the top level. And it was a much more modern looking kitchen. To me, it was not a luxury that this house had 2 kitchens. In fact, to me, it just felt more like a redundancy and wasted space. Why would we need two kitchens. We wouldn't. The kitchens had been put in, I expect, because they had more than one family living there, and they decided, let's turn this into a two-family dwelling, but without doing more of the surgery that would be required to truly separate the two layers of the house. So it was a bit awkward, and I was not really loving the idea that there would be two kitchens, because what if that other kitchen could be used for some other space? And then how much is it going to cost? And how are you going to redesign, et cetera, et cetera? You can see where my brain is going with that. The house seemed like it was very much patchwork, right? It was built in reaction to, right? So I guess they had some people living there and they needed to fix things, right? Hence the second kitchen. Another patchwork aspect of the house was there was a shower stall right outside the main kitchen. So it wasn't really placed near a bedroom. It was just kind of there. It wasn't as bad as a house that we visited a couple of years ago where there was a freestanding toilet in the attic. That was a new one, right? It had been added for whatever reason into a large room in an attic. So it wasn't that bad, but it still felt very out of place, right? So the guests come over and there's this little closet thing that is a shower. But, you can see why it's there, right? But it didn't have coherence, right? It seemed very reactive. The house itself seemed undecided. Is it a duplex or not? Is it meant to house more than one family or not? It wasn't really clearly delineated one way or the other. And as you can imagine, the aesthetic, so even just the surface of the house itself was inconsistent. So in some rooms, you had a bit more of a 90s feel. The finishings were not old, but not new. In some places, you had more of a wooden structured cabinetry. In other areas, it was more of a polished look. The pieces didn't speak to each other. At the end of our experience viewing the house, right, and it did have some nice features, right? It was big, it was spacious, it had bedrooms, it had bathrooms, it had a yard, it had a garden, it had things that were nice enough features, but it lacked coherence. And my daughter at the end of that said she felt dizzy, and I felt just this sense of, I just don't get it. I don't understand it. It's confusing to me, and it feels like it would be a lot of work, right? I mean, I get it. Sometimes you see a home and there is potential. I didn't see the potential. Now, as we stepped outside, we saw that there was an open house across the street. Now, this is what I mean. We hadn't planned to go to a second viewing, but we were there. So we walked across the street, and the house that was for sale was almost the exact opposite of the house we had just seen. It was a half duplex. It was a brand new build. It was probably half the size in terms of square footage relative to that first house. Now, unlike the first house that didn't have a lineup out the door, this house was clearly the place to be. There were people sitting on the front deck on the chairs that had been put out for the display. It was a sunny day, right? And so, I wasn't sure, is this an open house? Is this somebody's actual house? It looked like they were truly very comfortable, maybe even living there. We step in, the realtor's there, there's people coming in and out, there's people viewing, oohs and ahs, and the house is beautiful. This was a house that we learned was designed specifically by the owners of the other side of the duplex. So a duplex, of course, has two dwellings in one. And the couple that designed the duplex and lives in the carbon copy image of that duplex on the other side of the house, they designed it exactly to their specs. So the layout was to their specs, the appliances, all of which were beautiful, high-end, very polished. All of it had been designed because they had been unable to find the house of their dreams, and so they designed it. So with much anticipation, we explored this gorgeous house. It was beautiful, right? The aesthetics were perfect, as you can expect. It was shown beautifully, much like a hotel or a museum, the beautiful furnishings, the throw pillows, just so. And as we explored the house, it had some really beautiful features. And at the same time, as gorgeous as it was, it also didn't really speak to me. Why was that? Well, it was overly customized. It was hyper specific to the couple that had designed it. And so while it was beautiful and it was polished and I loved the appliances and I could see myself having a really nice time in their super fancy whatever, it had some design features that would never work for my family or for me. So some examples in the master bedroom. You step into the master bedroom and it has a walk-in closet. Who doesn't want a walk-in closet? But there was this big walk-in closet and just a tiny amount of storage. And there was no door on the walk-in closet. So you can imagine you're in the room and you're looking through the doorway into the closet. If it's messy, you have to look at that. The bedrooms were small and they had built-in storage, that wall storage that is quite aesthetic. I like it. But if I imagine the way that my kids like to live, which is to have surfaces on which to put many things, many things on many surfaces, where would those things go? I mean, how would they live in a house with no dressers? And the bathrooms, right? When you go into those bathrooms and they look beautiful, but you try to imagine where you would put stuff and there's no room for it, right? The sink is on a very small counter. There's no direct storage underneath it. The mirror is beautiful, but there's no way to open it and tuck things in behind it. So not really functional. And there was this lovely feature in that house. It was a reading nook at the top of the stairs. Beautiful, right next to a big window. You could look outside and see the trees and the neighborhood, but there was no door. And there was no space within the house where one could do what I like to do and need to do for my professional work, which is to close the door and have a Zoom call. So the house, while gorgeous and, no complaints from an aesthetic standpoint, well, except functional ones, it wasn't a good fit either, right? It was too specific. So at the end of that, what you see, and you can see it as I'm describing it, on the one hand, there's this first house, which is big with all this space and it lacks coherence and it is just not usable. It is so reactive. It has been built in reaction to that it is no longer functional. It is not coherent. On the other hand, the second house is too rigid. It is a house that was custom built for two people, a very specific stage of life. And for anybody who does not fit their life almost to a T, that is not going to fit either. And so for you, the relevance here is that you may find that you are feeling stuck between where you might be. You may be in the practice equivalent of that first house. And yet, when you're looking at your options, they feel like that second house. They feel too rigid. They feel like they're designed for someone else. They look really, really good when you're standing at a distance and saying, wouldn't it be amazing to live in that gorgeous house? But when you start to explore what that actually looks like day to day, you very quickly see that it is not for you. So why now? Why this episode? This is really a reminder, right? This weekend, this experience was a reminder to me of the stuckness. And so many of us are stuck, not in all places at the same time, but in different pockets. Like I said, it could be a big picture stuck. You are in a job right now and you are really struggling. Is this the right place for you? And you don't know. And it could be that less than that, right? Not as big of a deal. It could be, you love your work, but the systems you've got right now aren't working. Or there's this one type of work in particular that you've got to get rid of. And so the purpose of today's episode is to give you permission to make the changes that you need to make and to give you some guidance through the form of questions that will help you get unstuck, that will help you start to see how you could take whatever it is, wherever you're stuck. And if you're feeling like you're in that reactive mode, but you don't quite feel ready to step into something else, how can you begin to tear it down in order to rebuild? Now, the reason you might feel like you need permission is because you are scared to move forward. You feel a sense of resistance. And there are a number of reasons why you might feel like that. The biggest reason is usually sunk costs. If you are in a role that you are in and you have been for a while and you've invested in relationships, you've built your name, you've built the habits, you've built the systems, letting go of all of that can feel scary. It might be that you are judging yourself for wanting to change. You might look around and say, you are so lucky to have what you have. You should simply make it work because that is what people do, right? It's indulgent, it's wrong. And if you're judging yourself, then we want to let that go. It's okay to be in a situation that many other people would want and to say, this is not for me. It might be that you are holding on and there is a fear that if you were to make a change, you would disappoint people. You might disappoint your clients, you might disappoint your colleagues, you might disappoint family members who have invested in you, who care about you, who see you in a certain way. And so the transition, the idea that you would ever leave the place you're in, even if it's that reactive, incoherent practice that you no longer want to be in, the feeling of change can feel so overwhelming. And so what I'm giving you is permission, if you need it, to say yes, permission to make a change. It doesn't even have to be making a change. It could be simply exploring what it would be like to make a change. So hopefully that gives you a sense of peace, a sense of a weight lifted off your shoulders. You're allowed to change things. You do not have to stay in the incoherent house, whatever that means to you, whether it's your whole practice or just a part of it. You don't have to stay there if you don't want to. And so the question then becomes to go from where you are to where you want to be. How do you even approach that? And this is where it can feel so overwhelming. And here are 3 questions that will help you to clarify what a rebuilding process could look like for you and how to get to where you want to go. And the questions are simple to ask. They are perhaps less simple to answer because they require thought. They require you to be honest with yourself. They require you to give yourself the time and space to answer them. So maybe once I've shared the questions with you, maybe you write them down. Maybe you give yourself pockets of time to reflect on them, to write down your answers. There's no hurry here, but I would love for you to be asking yourself these questions because they will help you get clear about what that metaphorical house of your dreams, if we're talking about your career, what that could look like for you. So the first question is to ask yourself, what is currently working for you? Now, no matter what practice you are in, no matter what systems you have, no matter what type of work, what clients you have, there are components of what you do that are working for you. And so what we want to do is take an inventory of the things that you love. The way that you practice, the type of files that you have. Maybe it's the thrill of going to court and speaking on your feet. Maybe it's the peace you feel when you're reviewing a file for the first time and you're ideating about the strategies you'll use to solve the case, help your client. It might be the joy that you feel when you're trying to figure out the answer to a question and you stumble upon it and it just feels so satisfying. It could be the conversation you have with your colleagues where you finally figure out your strategy and you're all excited and everybody has a role to play and you know that it's going to be great working with this team. It's that conversation with your client where maybe you're delivering amazing news they've won and you're so excited to share that victory with them. Or maybe the news is not so great, but you are so pleased and you feel so blessed that you get to be the person to give that message to them. So what are the things for you in your practice that light you up, where you feel that sense of joy, where if you've had a good day at the office, a good day at work, what was it? What was it that was good? I'd also encourage you to get really specific about percentages, right? Do you notice that there is a certain amount of maybe written work, writing time, quiet time work that you love to do, and maybe there's a certain amount of more high stress or forward-facing, client-facing, people-facing work that balances out the calmness, we will say, of the written work versus more of the adrenaline-producing, exciting, on your feet type of work. So ask yourself these questions. What is working for you? And you want to take that inventory. So if we go back to the house, right, we look at that house and we can say, okay, that first house, it lacked coherence, right? It was too much. It had 2 kitchens, but you know what? It had this really beautiful yard and it had a garden in the yard, and I loved having that garden. Or the house itself had big bedrooms that looked onto a lovely tree-lined street. I want more of that, right? So what is the practice equivalent for you of these things that you love and want to keep? Now, you can also make a list of the things that you don't want. I didn't include it in my 3 questions, but you could absolutely do that. It's more of a way of what you would stay away from. But I think for the purposes of creating, of rebuilding, I would be much more interested in what you want and building around that versus trying to build against something, trying to build in reaction. Because again, it kind of goes back to that house one. If we're building to avoid, then are we building to build, right? There's a nuance there. And I just feel like this exercise would be more fruitful and more expansive if we were to focus on the things you love and the things you want and to build around that. So that's how I'm framing the questions for you today. Now, the second question then is, let's imagine that you were to start over, that you had that empty slate, much like the duplex builders. There's nothing there, right? There is no practice. There are no systems. There are no habits. There are no people who see you as playing a certain role in their life. And when you stop playing that role, they're going to be upset. There are no ongoing files that if you were to walk away tomorrow, that you feel like your client would be left stranded because you're no longer at the firm or for whatever reason. So here, if you were to step fresh, right? If you've ever taken mat leave or you've taken a long vacation or you've been on a form of sabbatical for any extended period of time, you've been between jobs, that fresh, the first sip feeling that Starbucks talks about. If you had that first sip feeling of the practice that you would love to create, what would you build? Building from the ground up, what would you build? So here, again, you may have overlap between what you love about your current practice and what you would choose to build if you were starting from scratch. So what are those things? Who are the clients you most want to work with? Do you have colleagues? Do you want to be a solo practitioner where you're running things on your own? Or do you have people that you're working with? And if you've got people you're working with, what does that look like? What kind of law do you practice? Who are the clients that you serve? Are you serving big clients who have multiple offices across the world? Or are you serving the mom and pop shops that need a local lawyer who can help them stitch together their business plans? I mean, who are you most wanting to spend your days with? Your colleagues, your clients? Are you a litigator who goes to court? Are you going to tribunals? Are you a solicitor who's drafting deals? I mean, what is it exactly that you want to do? Who do you want to be with? How do you want your day-to-day to be spent? What substantive work do you want to be doing? Are you drafting? Are you arguing? Are you advising? Are you mentoring? Are you teaching? I mean, what are the things that you most love to do, that you see yourself wanting to do? And what is the list of those things, right? And then if you take the clients and you take the work and you think about how would you want to organize them? How would you design a practice so that you were able to do the things that you would want to do? What exactly does that look like? What are the hours that you would keep in a perfect world? Where would you do your work? Would you be working remotely from home? Does that work for you? Or do you want an office space where you're working with other people? Is it full-time office, part-time office? What exactly does that look like for you? I mean, there is so much flexibility in this era in terms of how you design your work days, your work weeks. And so if you were to design from the ground up, what exactly would that look like? What kind of pace do you want your work to be? I mean, do you want it to be busy? Do you like I always like having a little bit more than capacity. To me, that feels motivating. Maybe you're the same way. So here, the exercise is to dream about it and to design it as much as possible. The more granular you can get, the better. And if you can write this down, even better. Even better. I recently read an article. It was published on the Forbes website talking about how you want to write your goals down. Why? Because it increases the chances of you actually accomplishing them. And they talked about a couple of reasons for that. Number one, when you write things down, you externalize that thing. You can now see it, right? You can imagine why vision boards are effective. If you can see something, then it's on your mind's eye, right? You've got a post-it that reminds you to do something and you haven't reached the point where you just ignore it. It might be that visual cue that keeps you alert to the goal. It also helps to get things outside of your brain, outside of your memory, right? Especially something like this, right? Especially something like this where you're going to have to dig into the recesses of your brain to find out what it is that you actually want. You know, we sort of talked about it at the beginning. If you're in a practice that feels reactive, chances are it's reactive because it's got too much. There's too much there. Maybe things that you don't want or need to have in your practice. You might have trouble with the relationships at work and streamlining those relationships, narrowing the demands, managing expectations. If it feels reactive, there's a reason for that. And so to carve out time, that already is a challenge. And that is the challenge you will need to address and overcome in order to do this ideating process. It's really important. Why? Well, as I just mentioned, because you're going to even just understand for yourself what that looks like, the dream, you're going to write it down. You can externalize it. And the other thing that this does, which is really cool, is that it actually encodes in your brain the process, right? It gets committed to memory. It gets committed to a process. I confess, I don't know the exact mechanics. I just know it involves the hippocampus, where you're now programming yourself by writing down this list of things that you would love to have. By writing down these goals, you are unconsciously, subconsciously programming yourself to start finding and creating these things. So this is a really valuable exercise. It is absolutely worth the investment of your time. So that is number 2, is in that dream situation where you get to start building your practice from scratch, right? You get to create the practice equivalent of that second duplex, that beautiful space that you love to be in. It starts with a design. So we want you to be the architect and the designer behind that exercise. And then that leads you to step 3. If you look at where you are currently, where you are in the practice that you're in, and you look at that dream practice that you have, what is the simplest path that will take you from where you are today to where you want to go? And you might tell yourself, well, I don't have the answer to that question. If I knew the answer to that question, I'd be there already. Okay. If you were able to step outside and see yourself as though from an observer, you can imagine a mentor maybe that you have who always seems to get you and help you and put you on the right track. Maybe it's a friend who, whenever you speak with that friend, they just help you. They believe in you. Maybe it's a family member, a parent or a grandparent, or even if it's a grandparent, maybe they're no longer with us. But if you were to talk to that person and they were to give you some help, what would they tell you? What would they see in you that maybe you're not seeing right now that is already setting you up, that is helping you make that path more simple? So that is the question. The simplest, not the most complicated. If you're anything like me, you're going to want to overcomplicate right from the very beginning. But, right? We're just going to ignore those voices for now and draw the straightest, shortest line between where you are and where you want to go. What does that look like? And you may have categories based on how you answered those questions, right? I always like to think of the people and relationships, clients, colleagues being one category, substantive work being another category. What exactly are you doing day to day? And then practice management, teams, the structure, the cadence being the third category. In each of those categories, what does it look like going forward? And what is the straightest, simplest, shortest, easiest way for you to get there? And with that, you get to start mapping out the transition plan from feeling like you are in that first house, right? That reactive lack of coherence, into what will be for you that dream house, that custom build. And one last thing I just have to say, because as I described, that second house, beautiful, functional, and I also mentioned it felt rigid. And I feel like it's important to mention here that the dream that you build, the house that you build, the practice that you build, we're building that to the specs based on the perspective you have today. And what I will tell you is that when you move into that new house, when you reach the point that you're in that new house, there will be a period where the specs are aligned to perfection. You will enter into coherence. And as we started out, the place where you start to feel stuck, that will happen again because you are going to continue to grow and evolve and all of those things. So any practice that we build, yes, it may feel perfect. And we also want to have our mind turn to the idea that we will continue to grow, we will continue to adapt, and that there will be flexibility that we will need for ourselves and for our systems, for our practice, so that we continue to evolve. So I hope you have taken from this episode, number one, the imagery, right? If you feel like you're somewhere stuck, if maybe you're in that first house, right? There's just a lack of coherence. The systems no longer make sense. They don't speak to each other the way that you want them to. You don't feel excited to step into your work because there's a lack of coherence. If you feel like that, you've got a mental image of what that looks like in the house context, but also in your own practice, in your own life. Where is that lack of coherence? Where have you stitched together a patchwork solution that is no longer tenable? Hopefully you've also got in your mind's eye this idea that you can build something, the practice equivalent of your dream house. What does that look like? You've got some questions that you can ask yourself to help design, to get out of your head where you are right now, to really get clear about what works, what you want in the future, how you can get there. Some questions to ask yourself. And finally, permission. Permission to explore, permission to ask yourself these questions, permission to tear it down if you want to, and to rebuild it if you need to. So if you want my help with any of this, answering the questions, clarifying the questions, figuring out what the simplest, straightest path would be for you, how to implement the steps that it would require you to take to get from where you are, to get to where you want to be. If you would love to have support with any of this, you're welcome to reach out to me. I would love to help you, to support you, to help you see where you are more clearly, to see where you want to go more clearly, and to support you in what can feel like a really difficult and confusing process. It doesn't have to be, and it's not something you have to do on your own. So thank you for joining me, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I have loved having you with me today, and I hope to reconnect with you again next week. Take care. Bye for now.
If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.